Welcome to another episode of the Transmute Tapes podcast. Today we have a special guest, James Freeman. He's founder of the James Freeman Gallery in Islington, London, and we're delighted to talk to him. Since opening in 2003, his gallery has become known for championing something he calls contemporary historicism, showing artists whose work draw from myth, ritual, and history while speaking powerfully to the present. With his reputation for curating exhibitions that are both intellectually rigorous and emotionally resonant, James invites us to see how ancient impulses and contemporary urgencies can meet within the space of art. We first met James earlier this year when we traveled to London to see Slipping the Veil, an exhibition he co-curated with Elena Unger at St Bartholomew the Great. Shown inside a 900-year-old church, the works spoke with and through the architecture, transforming the sacred space into an art collaborator. That evening we began a conversation with James, and we're delighted to continue this on the podcast right now. Before we start with the interview, let's tune in the Maison Douce style into the topics and the overarching themes and thoughts we discovered while talking to James, what we discovered talking to Elena Unger and experiencing the exhibition, both within the St Barth Church and also when we visited the James Freeman Gallery. We took these ideas, these impulses, both from our experience and from the interview we conducted, and turned it into some ideas, a little meditation on art that reaches through time and space. Take it away, Lotte.
So I want to share with you some thoughts I had after we had this beautiful and interesting conversation with James Freeman and after we visited London. So let me share some thoughts with you. The transhistorical dialogue that occurs when contemporary artists work with techniques or visual reference to artifacts from the past is very interesting. James talks about a phenomenon that art can evoke, and it is to make you feel connected to the people that came before you. Imagine the people that looked at a wonderfully crafted, colorful glass window in a church 200 years ago, and then seeing something similar in style, but with a contemporary story that is being told. He talks about the illusion of thinking that people in the past were totally different or less intelligent, and how it opens a dialogue between past and present when you realize that this was not the case at all. When you realize how skilled they were and under what conditions they made artifacts, it is very stunning and humbling at the same time. And as an artist, I can totally relate to that. And I think it's a very poetic and beautiful thing he discovered there. In my practice, I experienced a similar phenomenon. It is not as visible as in the works we saw at James Freeman's Gallery at the Medieval Ice exhibition, for example, but it taps into the same field, I would say. As many artists, I somehow have the ability to step into another realm where time does not exist or works differently. It is like an eternal moment that has always been there and always will be there. Maybe you can call it the moment inspiration comes to you. Imagine the Australian Aboriginal caves where you have hand stencils dating back to 40,000 years ago, and in some special cases, this ritual is still alive, and people add their hand stencils to keep this visual and spiritual story continuing. They see the role of aesthetics as some kind of messenger through space and time. So for me, you can enter this space as an artist, but also as a spectator. And it is very important to do because in the face of an ongoing history of human violence, war, destruction, and oppression, you find this other side of being human. You find a place of belonging. And this thread of people creating beautiful and meaningful things that links us to the past, but also to the possibilities of the future. And this is our shared history.
These were our thoughts on art throughout space and time. We're happy to learn what you think of it. But without further ado, please enjoy the conversation with James Freeman.
The Transmute Tapes, a Maison Douce podcast. The Transmute Tapes, Maison Douce.
James, welcome to the Transmute Tapes podcast. Pleasure to have you on. How are you?
Very well, and thank you for having me indeed.
Thank you so much. How are you? How was the London Gallery Week this year? How was it for you?
It's all been, the last few months have been insanely busy because I had 3 exhibitions opening. I would never recommend anybody to do this, to open 3 exhibitions in 3 weeks. Sometimes I have people, curators, not artists, it's different, but for curators say to me, "Oh, I've been working on a show. It's been so much work." And I think, yeah, I know. And I say, "How many shows do you do?" And I saw them like 3 a year, 4 a year. I was like, okay, yeah. I normally do about 12, 13. For some reason, I had 2 off-site shows this year. So I had one opening in the gallery with a German artist, Volker Hermes. And then I had a collaboration with a client of mine who has a foundation called the Backroom Foundation, with an exhibition based on the Bloomsbury Group, but then a contemporary artist of mine working with drawings based on the Bloomsbury Group, which had been a long time in development. And then I had the exhibition that I met you at, which is the Slipping the Veil show at Great St Bart's.
Exactly.
And
we're going to talk about this later.
You saw that show. That wasn't a small undertaking. You know, it's kind of the oldest.
Yes.
It's a big church. It's the oldest, probably most dramatic medieval structure in London. And that was a big show. And that was one of 3. So to give you an idea, so it's been a busy time. Yeah,
that sounds really busy. So happy you took the time, and we get to talk now. You know, as I already mentioned in the intro, I mean, Lotz and I, we went to London in May to see both your gallery, also the opening at St Barth's, and we loved your gallery, the artists you represent, their artwork. So we're really keen to learn more about you, your approach, and happy to talk to you now. But you know what, James? Let's start maybe at the very beginning, because there are prominently documented first times reports of moment when people discovered their passion and how everything changed as a result. So when I thought about you and your gallery, I was really wondering, do you remember the first piece of art that shook you awake, so to speak, that actively invaded your perception and set you on the course you are today?
I sort of do. I come from, how shall I say it? I grew up in this business, but not directly in the art business, should we say, in the antiques trade. Okay. So my whole life, I've been surrounded by special things. It's a wonderful way to be. And as you were saying that, so the thing that kind of shook you awake or made you realize, I was thinking, when I talk about how we used to go on holiday, we'd go over to Ireland several times a year because all my family is Irish. My parents are Irish. We'd drive over in the car to go and see the family. And as soon as we'd get across the Irish Sea and arrive at Rosslare, there'd be an antique shop about 3 minutes drive in. My father would go in, he'd buy something, he'd shove it in the back of the car and go, right, there we go, that's paid for the trip, we're off. And we'd be surrounded by objects. So literally, when you said there, something that really kind of pushed you awake. I'm just coming off like kind of 5 a.m, 6 a.m off a ferry trip, and then I get a bronze with a finger poke me in the face going, there we go. These are the kind of things that I was surrounded by them. So by the time we'd be on the way back, we couldn't move. We were packaged in amongst all of these different sculptures and objects. So so in terms of, I find it very hard to talk about favorites or individual artworks that stand out. I find it quite difficult to do that. I wonder why it is. Sometimes I think about them differently rather than because they're all very special, and I can sometimes find objects or aesthetic objects. I can find the aesthetic in an object that a lot of people might not think about. And I also find things very special that other people don't. People think in terms of, the standout or the star or the hero image. I'm hopeless like that. I think about the whole thing. I say, okay, if an artist is making all of these different things and we see it as a group, like it's an immersive experience. I've got a few favorite paintings, I think, but a lot of my favorites come from far, far later, far, far later down the line. Even though I grew up in all of that field of aesthetic objects, I became deceived, however you would say it, when I was very small, that I was an artist. And so despite all of the best intentions of everybody else around me when I was younger, I decided I was going to go to art college. And I've got quite an academic kind of, I have a different mind. I'm not an artist. And I think it's the system that we have over here in the UK, or we probably still do, but at least when it's beginning to become quite a long time ago, that you would have a foundation course first, which is a year. And the idea of the foundation course, or the purported idea of the foundation course, is that you experiment and you find out, are you a printmaker? Are you in graphics? Are you in illustration? Are you a painter? You do all of these different things and you find out. And my problem is I'd already been experimenting. I was a rather difficult child, and I'd already been experimenting with pretty much anything I could experiment with. By the age of 18, when I arrived on this course, I'd done a lot of my experimenting already. But what I hadn't really found, that I think what that course was useful for me was to realize, actually, you're deeply driven and fascinated by the aesthetic world and by art, but you're not an artist. It's an extremely hard thing to accept, extremely hard. And there are tons of people in the art world who at some stage in their lives have had to accept that fact. Because being an artist is not like, you hear people go, I kind of like doing drawings, or you say, when's the last time you did a drawing? I haven't done one for a couple of months. You're like, do me a favor. Being an artist is like being pregnant. You're not a little bit pregnant. Either you are or you aren't. It's just one or the other. And either people have it or they don't. When we get talking about the kind of people that I work with people for whom it's not an interest. They don't say, I thought about it and I thought, I could make a living doing this or this, that, and the other. Maybe, if I do this kind of artwork, then that will fit in there. These are not the people I work with. I work with people for whom it's an absolute affliction. They have no choice. And any time you're talking to them, you can have them outside in the outside world, and you can catch them off guard. And anytime you actually catch them, what are you thinking about? They're in the studio. They're not listening to you. They're not there. They're in the studio the whole time. That's what they want to be doing. And that's what I mean about it being an artist. So I went to art college essentially to discover that I'm not an artist, which was a difficult thing to accept, given that I had followed that path for a long time. And through very formative years, you kind of from the age of 10 or 11 up to 18, your opportunity years where you're going to be giving yourself the shape that you're going to be using in the way that education is now pitched as this kind of technical functional thing. you're given it and then you're going to, okay, you use it in order to earn this. And that's the only function of education is use.
Well,
but you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Yeah,
you know what I mean? That's how they
of course.
now.
Yeah.
So those formative times I dedicated to art. I then went, I did lots of other things. I've had tons of different jobs. I have to be careful. I often say I've had real jobs as well, and then I find artists and people go, "What do you mean art's not a real job?" They don't get my sense of humor. It's totally a real job, but
absolutely, I mean, it's so much fun. It doesn't seem like it. I know what you mean.
Yeah, exactly. So, but in the end of it, you can't really. It's quite hard to get away from it. You end up gravitating back, and that's what I was saying. There's a lot of people in either arts administration, in curating, in organization, in supporting artists, shall we say, or putting the framework in place, or the distribution models, or whatever you want to call it, who initially thought that they were going to be artists and then had to accept that they weren't, and then have found that their gifts. They're far more useful and productive and creative, as a matter of fact, in doing other things related to art. As a good client of mine said, he was very high up in an advertising company, and he said, the most creative people in my company aren't always the creatives, you know. And then when I did a project with him and saw how his strategic mind worked, you would think, yeah, I see what you mean. That's another form of creativity, and it can be very, very useful. So
yeah. Wow. Okay. Thanks for that's an image I'm going to keep in mind. You packed in your little car full of antiques, and then off to art school, and having this realization. But I mean, many years later, you're opening the James Freeman Gallery. Maybe you can take us somewhere in the middle between. Okay, you're at art school, you're realizing maybe this is not my path. So what key turns, what mentors shaped your path, your road to opening your gallery as it is today?
I think, how would I approach that question? Really, I opened the gallery because an opportunity presented itself, and I wanted to be putting on shows. I wanted to be working with artworks. At the time, I was still drawing, and I was like, "Oh, you never know. You might be able to put your own drawings in. Good luck." But it was one of these ideas. The opportunity presented itself of a space, and I said, "Listen, I can make use of this space. I can do something with it."
Yeah.
And I mean, now my gallery has a very particular focus. I'm a small gallery, and I'm quite happy to be a small gallery. This is part of the conversation a lot of the time I will have with artists is, what do you want? You have to tell me what you want, because if what you want is, white cube, and I mean that by white cube or Gagosian or Pace and all of that.
Yeah.
That's not me. It's not what I do. And it's not what I'm aiming at either. And it's quite important to be very clear. And curiously, a lot of the artists that I work with now have been in the business a while, know the game, maybe have had the experience to go, do you know what? That big, shiny, glittery ball in the sky isn't actually what I want for myself and my life and my satisfaction. And it's sort of there's more meaningful things to be doing. I'm not saying that for everybody. I'm just saying for myself.
Sure.
I don't aim at it. I aim at it because it's not what fascinates me. But it takes time to work that out. And when I first had my gallery, it wasn't like it is now. I didn't have my focus, and I think really the focus that I have, which I'll shoehorn it in here, is
please.
I call of course, it's opportunism. I call it contemporary historicism, which is a term I've made up. The thing itself is very prevalent, but the term and the focus is what I had to come up with a name for the thing, which is essentially artists interpreting the contemporary moment through the lens of art history. So using art history to look at the present, and in the same process, then creating a stronger link with the past. Because I'm a big believer that you lose your history, you get lost. You get,
Yes.
And we have this. I think in the last kind of 100 and something years, this whole kind of the modern, 20th century, certainly postmodern moments, that things change so quickly that there's a feeling that we become unstuck. And we lose connection with the past because this change is so rapid, and it's very easy to think, oh, well, we're different from somebody 300 years ago or 500 years ago or 2000 years ago, that they are somehow, that we're different. And it's actually quite a lonely place to be, even though there's billions of us, it's quite a lonely place conceptually to think that we're that different. And one of the things that I like to look into, and a lot of my artists, I think, would kind of, it's sitting there, it's not their agenda, but it's sitting there in the background, is to say, well, actually, we've got so much in common. It's really about marking what we've got in common rather than we've got in difference, and using art history as a framework for that. But it took me a long time to arrive at that. I really, it was something that I was doing in lots of my shows and in lots of the artists that I was working with, but I wasn't explicit about it, either to the audience nor to myself.
Yes.
I didn't even recognize it myself. I thought it was there, but, and I had all of these artists kind of coming along, and the artists that would work well within my context would be the historically motivated artist. And I'd wonder why that is. We would have all of these things in common. And then there was a time when I nearly, because the business was very, very bad, and I nearly had to write a CV and get a job.
Okay.
Now I'm unemployable. I can't.
As are most of us in the business.
Totally.
Yes.
I'm unemployable. I'm very useful, but I'm unemployable. I can't go and work for a company, and I'm hopeless. I just go off and do whatever I come up with a plan and I go and do it.
Yeah. I get what you're talking about. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So, and I was looking, I go, bloody hell, how am I going to go out and work for somebody and go through the interview process when everybody's polished up and they know how to do it? I can't do that. I can only talk to people like myself. I've given up on gave up a long time on trying to be somebody that I'm not, because I'm not very good at being other people. I'm only good at being myself.
As you should be. Yeah. But
again, it takes a while to arrive there.
Yeah.
And so as part of that, that's a shock of fear. That was a bucket of cold water. And I said, shall I just do, before I close, just give it a final go and just do only what you're interested in and pay no attention to any of the noise outside. Just only do what you're interested in, and don't care whether or not this art consultant thinks it's relevant, or they pay attention, or this artist likes just pay no attention to anybody. Just do what you're interested in. And then all of a sudden, that's when it all started working. So really my life, as far as I'm concerned, is a fairy story like that. The more I believe in magic, the better it works. So, and that's how I approach it.
What a quote, James. I love that. But in all seriousness, what you just said is, I'm doing this podcast. I host other podcasts where I talk to creators a lot, entrepreneurs, artists, and I hear this quite often. It's a recurring theme in people's biographies who accomplished something they really wanted, like not by accident, not by chance, but really by force of their own imagination. And most of them reach that point, and they sometimes put it a little differently, but the story is very often what you just described, this moment where you say, fuck all, I just do one last shot, I do just whatever, and how I want to do it, and when and where, and however the F I want to do this. And this is when it all comes together and it works. And it's a beautiful thing, I think. Yeah.
Totally.
James, we have to, sorry.
No, carry on.
You talked about this, well, I don't know if you call it positioning, if that's too much of a marketing term, but this philosophy about contemporary historicism you just mentioned. I really want to explore this because, without knowing you and without
knowing too much of your philosophy, this is what resonated with me, also with Lotte from our collective, and this is why we chose to come, and why we're so interested in you and the artists you represent, because this is something that really, you said it wasn't clear to you from the beginning, because it's not probably something you can't draw up, just emerges from doing what you do and going deeper and deeper, and all of a sudden you can see what it is if you take a step back. But I really want to explore this in different ways now, so we can take our time. But what's really interesting, if I have never heard of this, and I think of, okay, you combine contemporary art with historicism, with historical styles, technique, craftsmanship, but also with a certain idea of what role art maybe plays in society. I guess that's a big part of it. So as one of the first questions to explore this, how do you decide, if we talk about historical references or historical approach to art and society, what references feel urgent for you, for audiences today? And how do you differentiate between something that's merely nostalgic, which is also a big trend I see in art and pop culture in general?
Yeah, I think the thing with nostalgia is that I read a fantastic analysis of nostalgia years ago, and I wish I could remember it, and I can't.
Okay.
So, but it's, for me, nostalgia is based in kind of uncomfortableness and fear to a certain extent. That the idea of loss, that there's not the sense of security anymore, and nostalgia has a sense of security. It's very seductive, and to think that things were simpler, things were nicer. Even if it wasn't, I think a lot of nostalgia is probably, to me, nostalgia is almost happens by moonlight. It happens in the darkness.
Yes.
And there's an implicit darkness in nostalgia that somehow doesn't seem to matter. But if we were really kind of picked up and dunked straight back into what we were imagining, it wouldn't really be as nice. And I think that element of nostalgia, we see it in the populism at the moment, in terms of what's happening a lot. A very, very, it's a reality at the moment. This idea to want to go back to, should we say, a simpler time. And I think really a lot of this is based in either discomfort or fear or dislike of what's actually happening around, the feeling that there isn't actually something for us there, that we're feeling dislocated. And this comes back to a little bit what I was talking about in terms of what I see the use of our historical framework is establishing connections with the past and with the people who were making in the past and the experiences that people went through in the past, is to say, do you know what? You're not alone in going through this. This is something that's has been happening for centuries. This is a very human thing. It's a reality that you're not sitting there just on your phone alone, which is a very isolating, supposedly kind of a connecting, but actually very isolating experience. You are part of something much, much greater. And I think that's really how I understand the use of people taking art history, taking the references, taking the frameworks. I know sometimes people go, oh, it's pastiche. And you go, well, there's elements of pastiche. But you go, well, how else are you going to recognize a pattern if you don't kind of identify the pattern with things? You have to be able to perceive a pattern. Pattern recognition is a very human activity. And I think that this sense of continuity is something that makes us feel both more connected and less alone. So that's really, that's one aspect of it. I also feel, and I could get really fervent about this, so you'll have to tone me down if I get over enthusiastic about this. But I'm a sincere believer that the aesthetic experience, and what I mean by that is, from the artist's point of view of taking a material, whatever that material is, turning it into something different, not necessarily knowing, they're not doing product design. They don't necessarily know what they're making, but they feel they know what they're making. Creating this thing that isn't that is the material in a different form, and then the presentation of it, the ritual of reception of it, and the physical experience of that is a phenomenally important facet of being human. I find it hard to articulate how important I believe that is as part of the human experience.
Yes.
And the more we get disconnected by technology, I think the aesthetic, the in-person aesthetic experience, really for me is going to be one of the last lines of resistance against when people talk about AI and technological separation and dislocation. It is one of the last lines because it is one of the most human things. You go back, it doesn't matter how many thousand years you go back. We have aesthetics. It is fundamental, absolutely fundamental. And it's also what makes it highly entertaining is that it's actually not necessary, because when you talk, I have corporate clients, heads of massive companies go, but what's the point? What's the use? You don't, the very fact that it doesn't have a direct use, we're not talking about, a lever or a key that does this one thing. So you just end up, you're talking a linear A, B, C leads to D.
Yeah.
It isn't, that's not how it works, because human beings don't work that way. Well, they do sometimes, but, really digging deep down, that's not how it works for us. And, anyway, that I feel very, very strongly that it's an extremely important aspect of being. And it's something that, as I said before, I'm a small gallery. Somebody who's just heard that and then come into my shows, I'm a small gallery. That's a massively overblown ambition for what we're talking about. But I'm on a human scale. And I feel the human scale of things, the human scale of artworks as well, I think is very important, for not always, but for a human interaction. If you walk around, I was walking around the city of London on was it Sunday, Monday, I can't remember. And I always look at all of these massive glass constructions, and I think, what are you trying to tell us here? That we're too small, we're too irrelevant for your whatever kind of conceptual or capital construction that you have here. That we're an irrelevance to this. That degree of separation, and I know that's an aesthetic experience, but it's been thought through in terms of functionality and an exercise of power. And normally we're the losers on the end of that. And what I feel is that it's very, very important to regain the terrain and really reestablish the terrain of actually the experience of the aesthetic object as something that says, do you know what? This is what you have in common with so many other people. Yeah. And this is what you have, and these other people aren't necessarily still alive.
Yeah,
they could be dead 5,000 years. Yeah. You still have it in common with them. So
yeah. Wow. So many things I want to quote you on there. Well, first of all, I get exactly what you mean by walking through the city and seeing like the evil offspring of Bauhaus and all of that, misunderstood simplicity, functionality, all of that. I guess we have that all over the world. But to us, at least to us, everything you said was so present in the way you talk and write about art, and even what we can see online from it. At least to us, it really translated, no matter the size of a gallery or whatever. I think your philosophy and your view on art and humans and everything, it just translates through what you do.
Well, great. Thank you.
And but let's maybe explore this on one of your last exhibitions, because we were in London in May, end of May, and we saw the exhibition Medieval Eyes at your gallery, which, as I said before, resonated deeply with us and our understanding of art. You had artists like Caroline Smith, Mark Connolly, Pinky McClure, Joseph Dupré, or Joseph Dupré. I don't know.
Joseph Dupré, I think, yeah.
Yeah. And to us, it was like to start with two ideas. It was like one arc of thought was there's like a mythic thread there. Each of the artists taps in different folklore and mythology, classical, Celtic, Christian, and there was also art as a relic, like Caroline Smith's Man of Sorrow or Dupre's Reliquaries, both echo like devotional objects or something. So I'm really interested. Do you see these pieces functioning as coming from your positioning with contemporary historicism as some kind of contemporary reliquaries? Is there a relation to the mythic in the art for you?
For me, well, in terms of how that show came together, I've been wanting to do I remember a curator asked me about 3 years ago, and he says, so what's the next idea? What's the next big idea? And I said medieval abstraction. He's like, oh, I thought, and not easy to find, but I find medieval art extremely interesting. It's very visual culture, uses narrative, but not in a. It is didactic, but it isn't exclusively didactic. Mm-hmm. And narrative, I think, is something that's inherent in visual culture. In terms of these things being relics, if they're going to be reliquaries, then the whole idea of a reliquary is that there is the normally tiny physical remain, like kind of it's a beautiful idea, the concept of the relic, that you can actually physically touch these fantastical, magical, mythical stories. You can have physical contact with them somehow. It's a little bit like you hold your parents' hand and you realize they hold their parents' hand and the parent that they're them, and so within very not long time you have a chain of people going back hundreds of years, and all of a sudden you think this physical contact it's like a link that kind of casts you over a long distance across a lake, and you're in contact with all these people who are only stories otherwise. But I don't think for in the contemporary artworks the relic isn't there, because also I think the grand story, I don't think there is one grand story for which we can then have a relic to say this is we're not talking about a saint or a savior or a particular story, because grand stories have been debunked. We don't. I have a hard time going to church because I go to church a lot, but I don't go for the services because I have trouble with the stories. The literalism of it.
Yeah.
But the experience on it is the thing that actually still remains, and that really, I suppose, is what for example, Caroline Smith with her work. She's totally non-religious, and yet she has a lot of religious imagery, like the Man of Sorrow is a repeated motif in her work. And her work is a little bit on the one side saying, well, look at these characters. They look like they've been doing it for thousands of years, and like they look like they've been on. You go backstage and you see these actors and actresses. They're like, they're great on stage, but you see them back and they're smoking a fag, and it's like, oh yeah, doing another kind of. I'm doing another one now in a couple of hours. But it's like they've been doing it such a long time. And yet they still got the drama in the theatre, and it's something that she taps into, that idea that these are they're still very powerful ideas. They tap into things which you could write thousands of words on this, and it doesn't articulate it as effectively as an image. And I think there's something about the medieval. It's pre-pure. It's pre the concept that our rationalism will save us from everything. So you think about medieval times, we still have a very hard time getting our head around how they thought and how they understood things. They call it the Dark Ages, the most awful term. But we still have a hard time of understanding how they thought, because the individual wasn't the center of everything. Once you get into the kind of the Renaissance and the modern era, the early modern, the modern era, it's all about me. I order it. I'm the center. Perspective. I'm the main point of view here, and then everything else is about my point of view. But that wasn't the way for the medieval way of thinking. So you have and really that was the thing that sort of that was underlying that group of work, was that you have artists who are making it is about their individual experiences, but then they're using the framework. So Pinky using stained glass and the idea of narrative in stained glass, and she's going to tell her own personal narratives, but then they get projected in a way where it doesn't feel like she's the one that you really take. It doesn't feel like it's all about her.
Yes.
Very, very hard to do, to be extremely personal and yet it not just be about the artist, because sometimes it can just feel like, okay, well, we've all got stories. Very hard to do. Yeah. And again, very similar idea with Joseph Dupré with his ceramics, where he's telling, he's sort of making a parallel between the idealism, or the kind of the raising up the idea of the knight as the savior of society, and then going, well, I'm a public doctor. We do that function now. So it's taken aspects of it, and I felt with Mark Connolly there. I'm an enormous admirer of Mark Connolly's painting, because he manages to just really tap into the early, almost this pre-modern way of telling stories visually, that has. I know Picasso's the famous one for wanting to going back to being, if I can draw like a child, I'm being successful. But it's not just being like a child. Childlike isn't the right way to approach it. It's rawness. It's directness. That's very, very hard to do. So yeah, I have to be honest. I'm very self-critical with these things. So I was desperately worried whether or not it actually held together as a concept, that show. So I was pleased when I had some of the chief medieval curators from some of the biggest museums in the UK come along and go, 100%, loved it. So,
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah, never doubt yourself. I will continue to do so, but never doubt yourself. Yeah.
Well said. You know what? I'm revisiting medieval art again and again, because for quite some time in my younger years, I put it away because it was too religious for me, or I could not see beyond the religion and the dogma that is on the surface of a lot of that art. But just last month, actually, I went to Warsaw, to the National Museum, and they have a giant medieval art collection, because post-war they collected from churches all over Poland in this museum in Warsaw. And boy, oh boy, Polish Catholicism is a freaking horror movie. This is impactful. This is crazy. In Germany is very, very separate. I grew up in the south of Germany, very Catholic, a lot of religious art and architecture and churches. And then I moved north and not so much, right? Basically nothing. But then going to Poland and seeing how they, it's like Catholic art on steroids. It's really bloody. It's hardcore. It's
gruesome. And then when you go towards
really
the Baltics
gruesome
as well, the churches in the Baltic, anyway, going up towards the Baltic states, it becomes more and more visceral.
Yes.
In terms of, they tried to do that then with the Counter-Reformation to try and get a response. They should have gone backwards rather than forwards, because that intensity of whether it's in visual violence in a way.
Yes.
But it really tells the story, and it really grabs you and go, they must have been a very sanguine, audience going up towards the Baltics. They thought, we're really going to have to impress this lot in order to get this story.
Yes. Tough crowd.
Tough crowd. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you shift, because before we started recording, actually, we talked briefly about Puglia, southern Italy. And when I go there, and maybe you share this experience, to me, it's very interesting going there, because if you look at churches and religious artworks there, it's very interesting, because from the early Christian days, a lot it still exists there. Very, very old artworks, churches, and you see the pre-Christian influences, because, of course, as we all know, the church tapped into the sacred spaces, and a lot of the myths and stories they incorporated into Christian belief systems, and the whole architecture of physical architecture, mental architecture, all of this. And Puglia, there are a lot of places that are old enough that you can still see these layers. There's, for example, close to Ostuni, there's a cave up on a mountain, and this cave has been in use for thousands of years as a sacred site. You have like a holy woman with a mussel crown. She was buried there thousands and thousands of years ago, and it was a ritual sacred ground, and it was used so long that you also have a Holy Mother Mary fresco on the wall. So you have all these layers of culture, history, belief systems, and of course also art, because it's always been a part of this. And I just love these places. It's very intense, and you can't separate it, actually.
Yeah, but it's also there you realize whether it's articulated through aesthetics.
Yes, 100%.
Aesthetic experience of it is part of, no matter how much functionality you have, for most of us, I can't remember what percentage of the population are psychopaths. I think it's 10%. But for the rest of us, no matter how functional everything is, then there's still that bit. It's just not there. There's something missing, no matter how efficient everything is.
Yeah.
And that then really is what, and you see that then in these places where there was a need to, it's not like in 3,000 years ago, people were really stupider. In fact, a lot of the time you look at what they managed to achieve, try and, live under the circumstances that, the conditions that these people lived under, by no means easy. So, it's, people weren't stupid, but there is a need for these things. There's a need for meaning beyond reason.
Yes.
And you see that in a place that I've not been there, but I've been to. You can't pass up the opportunity of visiting places like that. Anytime we might be traveling.
Yes.
And then you see how, first of all, the accretion of different meaningful eras, first of all, attached to a certain space. And also then that will almost invariably be articulated through, they wouldn't be considered artworks, but aesthetic expression, aesthetic articulation. And then that becomes part of the coherence of the space, I think.
Yes.
It's built up.
Yes.
So,
yeah. And I mean, if we talk about this tradition in some way, you just keep this tradition alive as a gallery owner, as a curator. And with all of that we talked about, I'm really interesting. Can you share your typical curatorial arc, some thoughts that go into when you put a show together? Like what's an initial spark for you when you put up a show?
Ooh, bloody hell. Right. It'll be different for different shows. If I'm working on a solo show for an artist, then a lot of the time, it'll be what they're working on, and so a lot of the time that will come down to selection of the work, looking at what they've been doing and say, let's think about it. Let's see what's really happening here. And then let's present it in a way where, because I had this recently with one of the shows I did, that there was the setup in terms of the installation had already been done on paper. It was meant to be just go in and look at it. And I said, can I come around and actually see the things first of all? And we looked at it and it's like, give me 5 minutes, just 5 minutes playing around with it a little bit. And you come up with a far more interesting one. Well, I say that, but the consensus I was told, people being polite to me, is it was a far more interesting and dynamic way that it fits together. The artworks can respond better in different, depending on how they're situated. If it's a solo show for an artist, then they'll have their ideas. I will sometimes say, well, I'm going to write about it in the way that I see it. Not always, but sometimes, which will be a different take. And again, it is through my particular focus, my lens, that then, shall we say, I'll talk to the artist and we'll go backwards and forwards a little bit. And that's part of showing within my context. Let's say the same show shown within a different gallery might be presented slightly differently, but that's part of my context. So it's what I contribute, shall we say. In terms of group exhibitions, it's a different story altogether. Sometimes it can start from an idea where I have an idea and then I go, right, okay, that's what I want to work with. And I might have one artist or two artists whose work definitely fits. And then developing an exhibition is really about, I remember one of the main mistakes you make when you first start curating is you think, I'm going to put similar things together. So because that obviously belongs with that, because they're talking, and all you do is you neutralize most of the time, not always, but most of the time you neutralize. So a lot of the time it's important to look at different aesthetics, the visual of it, should we say, what the work looks like, and actually go, dig down and actually, what are they thinking about? They're doing it in completely different ways, but what are they actually thinking about? And then you'll find totally different, seemingly very, very different artists are actually talking about very similar things, but they've just gone in completely different directions in order of how they want to do it. Those combinations make the most interesting shows, is people for whom you have very, very, and not just, I'm not talking about, I'm an artist talking about the the existential suffering of the moment. None of that kind of overcomplicated. You've got artists who really thinking, do you know what? I'm interested in, I don't know, still life in the 1680s. Just top of my head. And you think, okay, there we go. You've got something concrete there. And then you'll find artists do completely different ways. Or I'm interested in humor, how people take things seriously, and actually it's actually very funny watching people being serious. Great. Lovely angle for a show. And then you have artists doing these things in all these different ways, and you just go and you put it together and they look totally different. So it's a very interesting experience, because you first walk in, you haven't thought about anything. You go, oh, this is fun. So I'm a big believer in actually, I deal with the public, and the public are very sharp. They're a lot of the time far sharper than people who are art world people, shall we say. They can read things very, very well, very quickly. They don't necessarily need my help to do it. And they will take it apart really quickly if it doesn't stand up to scrutiny, really quickly. Oh. And they also, it needs to actually appeal. It needs to be something that goes, oh, I'm interested in seeing that, because we have such a fascinating world around us anyway. It needs to be something that's going to be interesting. So I'm a big believer in actually going, well, it's just the experience. You can take it on just a, should we say, that despective term, a retinal level, and enjoy it. But then also once you start going further into it, actually this really, I'm not going to say makes sense, but it does something. So, oh, the artist is doing this artist does this, that artist does that. They're doing same idea, completely different results. My goodness, how interesting. And that's really where I think you kind of draw out the most of each artist's creativity, through contrast, so that's probably not exclusively, because my last show in the gallery completely contradicts everything I said just now. But that's okay. In on that. But it was intentionally done that way. But in general, my next show, for example, that I will have in September, is organized exactly like that. Is two artists who actually, there's sense of humor, there's an idea of this idea of taking sort of the beautiful and the object, and this idea. One person is doing very, very kind of quiet, contemplative things, sculptures, and the other artist is playing with this idea of kind of floral arrangements, but absolutely taking it so far that it's just like too much, and it's just absolute total overload. And but there's a sensibility underneath that. When I do this a lot, I'll do shows with artists who don't know each other and don't necessarily have any business being together. They don't, and then they look at each other's work and say, my goodness, I can see how this, but it's like when I advise younger artists, I say the first thing you need to do, get your work in group shows. We used to have tons of what were called projects, like 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. There's far less of them now, because everybody's so functional about things.
Same in Germany.
Look on Instagram, everybody's thinking so carefully about their strategy and this, that, and the other. Wow, where's the creative? Just get the bloody work out there. Do shows that might work, might not work. Find a bit of an empty warehouse and do it. And that's where, by seeing it from an artist and your creating point of view, you see yourself in context, and you go, oh, the things I thought I was doing really well, maybe they don't hold up so well, and the things that I didn't like, maybe they look really good, and all of a sudden then I have connections with people, and I'm part of the and that's really when a lot of work comes to life, is in context. So that's what I mean by when putting together either themed exhibitions, exhibitions around an idea. I'm usually quite conscious of that, of providing contrast and trying to draw out different strands of an artist's work that they might not necessarily, they know they're doing it, of course they do, but it might not be forefront at the time. Or it may have been something that was really interested them maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but it's become regular for them. Or they haven't realized that they've developed it further in this direction than they thought they had. And then you put them together with an artist that draws it out. So
do you find these themes or these truths that you curate a show around how do you decipher this yourself? Do you talk to artists? Where do you find this common thread that you build an exhibition around?
They're all mine. I just do that myself.
Awesome.
I just my own personal, it's like my program is a personal creative project at the end of the day. Like I said, I'm not an artist, but I look at them. I'm quite pleased with my program. I look at it and I find it interesting, you know. And so that's really where it comes from. I think I have an idea about something. I look at an artist's work and I think I really like that work. Why do I like it? What's in there that's interesting?
100%.
And then and then something comes out of that, you know.
I'm really curious. Because what you explained is like the inner world view of you and the artworks and the artists. Or in which way do you think about an audience? When you started out, have you had imagined an audience for your gallery to turn out differently? Do you think about, and I don't even mean in commercial or economical terms, but how do you think of an audience that is going to see that?
I don't think I do.
Okay.
I'm going to be brutally honest there. I don't think I do. This comes down to not doing it to try and keep others happy or to try and appeal to. Now, that doesn't mean that, for example, positioning a certain work so that when somebody walks in, they'll see it in this way, or that, should we say, the journey through an exhibition, even in a small space. But we had this in St Bart's and the Slipping the Veil show as well. It was very carefully thought out what the Stations of the Cross, what the journey would be. In that sense, definitely, because where do you see you've got the reveal, but in terms of how to
not in strategizing and creating,
but in terms of how people think, I basically assume that when I spent ages putting together shows, you know. I rehang shows like 3, 4, 5 times. This works, this doesn't, this, that, and the other. You know, so you need a bloody. And bearing in mind, I'm doing like I've been doing for a long time, one every 4 weeks. It's a high turnaround, and even still, it's like I'm not leaving until it's right, or until it works. And there'll always be one bloody wall that doesn't work. And kind of move them around and get them to talk to each other. But really, by the time I finished with that process, you know, I had somebody who worked with me for a few years, and he's like, God, there's so many. Okay, so there's color, so there's technique, so there's the tacticality, the physicality of the artwork. Then there's the motifs that are in them. Then there's the ideas. Then there's the references. And he's like, every single one, they're all like kind of overlaying. And I look at it and I go, yeah, they are. And it's not like you sit there and go, right, I plan it. But you get the work in front of you and then you go, okay, but they've all got to play off each other correctly for it to work. Because if not, it doesn't, you know? So, but it's I think that's quite an organic, I think that's quite organic. I don't think it's different if you're kind of organizing. I always come back to there was an exhibition on the Assyrians at the British Museum, which is a fantastic display, you know, but it's totally didactic. You're just saying this happened.
Oh yeah.
So you can organize. That's a really safe organizational thread.
Yeah, and also freaking boring, but
but you know what I mean. It
feels safe. Of course.
It's really, you know, you can pretty safely go, you know, we're going to put this magnificent light installation here. We've got this Stella here. We've got that. We know, you know, you can organize it that way. I think working with contemporary artists, you're not being didactic. You're not trying to say this is what it means. You're actually definitely saying doesn't necessarily have a meaning. And in which case it has to be a bit more organic. But then on the other side, in terms of how you organize it and display it, but then on the other side, anybody who's hung a show with an artist will know this. It's just like, you know, you can plan it as well as you like. Then they'll walk in and go, I don't know what it is. It doesn't work. You just go, I agree with you entirely. No logic to it. Move 2 things around. You go, all of a sudden, that's because that speaks to that and that speaks to that. And it can be on 3 of the 8 different levels that you're thinking about. You get a few of them in line, then it works. So, that's, you know, in terms of putting shows together.
That's a very interesting insight, I think, for everyone who's not who never had the challenge of hanging artworks for a for a curated event. But I want to talk about the show that we mentioned so often right now. I mean, we came to London for the opening night of Slipping the Veil in St Bartholomew the Great. If people don't know it, it's, I guess, the oldest church in London town, right? It's 900 years plus.
Yeah, it's 902 years old now. It's the oldest kind of standing structure. I mean, there are other structures that are in theory older. I saw one on, from 150 AD, but that's a story. It's not necessarily real. This is a standing structure. Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
No. That's very interesting, because I think I'm really interested in how this place informed the exhibition. It's a show you co-curated with Elena Unger, as far as I know.
Right.
And, to go full circle, why I'm so interested in this place, because as a collective, we think a lot about which role art plays in society today, not separating visual art from, let's say, location and even sound, or even attitude or composure, how you enter the space, how you can hold the space. So we had shows in white cubes in museum spaces, but also like in Berlin underground clubs. And it's amazing how this changes everything. Even though you perform the same things, you show the same things, but just the situation and the room and the people in it, how they change everything. So I'm really interested in, how was it? How did you come up with the idea to curate it in this very old church or structure? And you talked about this building being a sort of a collaborator. Maybe you could tell us about this.
Yeah, there's quite, yeah. So the building, first of all, I'll try and do it in chapters to make it. The building is probably the oldest still standing church in London. It's 902 years old. It is utterly spectacular. It's huge. It's medieval. It's got all of these different layers from all the different centuries. It's hugely atmospheric. It's very interesting when you find out that, because if anybody's going to go in there, you walk in, you look in, it's huge. It looks like a cathedral. It's actually only just one wing of what was a massive, massive church that we had until we had the gift of Henry VIII, who, as I explained to somebody, who then kind of came in and just destroyed. Anyway, there's a long story. I'm getting off the subject. So it's a stunning church. Eleanor is artist in residence at this church.
Yeah.
Which means partly creating work in the church environment, so actually making work there. She's been painting inside the church, and partly it's to encourage more kind of artistic engagement and bring in new audiences for the church. She organised an exhibition there in 2023 for the 900-year anniversary. And then shortly after that, for that show, one of my artists, Caroline Smith, was in the show. And shortly after that show, then Eleanor approached me and she said, I want to do another show and I'd like you to co-curate it with me. And I've known that church for many, many, many years. It's very special to me. I've always wanted to do something for it, more so than with it, for it. Because, I go down there for particularly Christmas services. I take my parents when they were still able to go down for Christmas services there. It's special. It's a very meaningful place. So anyway, Eleanor said, and I thought, I was going to just say yes, definitely, but I thought, no, let's have a look at it and think it through. But I couldn't resist. I mean, it's too special.
Yeah,
it's just the building itself is out of this world. We'll get onto this in a second, how intimidating that building is to work with. But basically she said, I'd like to do a show. I'd like you to work with me doing it. Fine. And why do you want me to do it? Because of your approach with historicism and the way that I work with the historical. And we have one of the oldest buildings in London. It's a grade 1 listed, which means you can't touch anything. You can't put a screw in the wall. You can't put a nail. You can't lift anything. You can't do anything. You can't do anything. So I looked and I thought, definitely, I had no idea how we're going to do this. What's the show going to be about? And I came up, I said, what should a show, because you've had your 900-year anniversary. That's a really good anchor for a show. It's just, oh yeah. But now what do you do? Why? And this is a meaningful space, so we can't have some flannel, some nonsense idea for the show. What is the role of this building? And the interesting thing with the way that Ellen and I work together, I have no idea whether this was my idea or her idea, because we have this a lot where we kind of go, whose idea was that? I'm not sure. It could have been yours, could have been mine. I don't know. But we were walking around it and really going, do you know what? This is a building that, okay, it's made up of physical elements, but actually really it's a really good example of the physical and the ritual in the physical being used to enter a more meaningful experience. So for things to become more meaningful than they are just by, if you break it down and go, okay, I've got a bit of stone here, I've got a bit of stone and I've got a bit of incense, there we go. No, you put them all together and go, my goodness, I actually feel something special. And we said, so, okay, let's do a show about that in contemporary art. Good luck. But that's the premise that we decided. Yep. That's the bright idea that we came up with. We started looking around for artists that we were, we had ideas of artists that we were going to work with. And the exhibition, the concept for the exhibition gradually developed to really make it a narrative, to make it a journey. And naturally, you have the idea of the Stations of the Cross, particularly for a Catholic church. I come from a Catholic background, and even with the Anglican Church, I think the Catholic roots are very, very important in it. Yeah. Don't get me onto Henry VIII again, but the roots are very important in it. And you can't tear that out of people just because you fancy becoming dislocated from your nearest neighbours. It doesn't work that way. So, we were thinking about, okay, so we have a journey. And we also had the collaboration with Nick Cave, the singer Nick Cave, and he had his 7 Psalms, which he wanted to be part of it, which worked perfectly with the idea of punctuating. As you were saying, you have the oral experience, the kind of the sound experience too, and that allows you to punctuate it as well. It gives it a structure. And then really it was a question of looking at artists because they're very different, very diverse group of artists that we included there, but it was artists who are trying to do this with their work. We're trying to, or not even that that's not the case at all, whose work managed to achieve this. That's a different thing, because they may not be trying to do it at all. When you actually ask them, the artist, what they're doing different things. But we looked and said, in this context, this is going to give us the feeling of a journey into the darkness. This is going to give us the feeling that we don't necessarily know what we're looking at until we look at it in the right way. This is going to get us the feeling of theatre, all of these different elements, what we were looking for to bring it together. They were fantastic to work with, the church. They were very nervous to begin with, as was I, because it's an incredibly intimidating space. You can't put the fixing in the wall, can't do anything. Yeah. At the beginning, they're like, okay, they're on top of us the whole time. Even though Eleanor was one of the trustees and knows them, but they were on top of us, and quite rightly so. I think, I've installed a lot of shows in a lot of places all around the world. And at the end of the day, I thought, listen, we'll make it work. So show me what you've got, and then I can get pictures on the wall. I've got ways, let's put it that way. I've got solutions. Yeah. With sculptures as well, we've got ways of doing everything that are respectful for the church. And I think one of the main things that was important with that show was respect for the church. You couldn't try and compete with it. It was pointless. You try and outdo that church, you will be slapped down every single time. It is the most dramatic. And that was a very big thing when we were selecting the work. Texture, the kind of the textural subtleties of things, or trying to out spectacle a place that is utterly spectacular was going to be impossible. So what we really decided was what we're going to have to do is work with it, and for it to be they need to feel that the work needs to feel like it belongs there, rather than it's going to, that very typical kind of contemporary. It's like, oh, shouty, look at me. I'm kind of, I'm forget it. We weren't going to deal with anything like that. Everything had to feel like it actually belonged there. And that really then fed into the whole curatorial idea that this is a ritual space that brings everybody in together, and it's very inclusive. And then all this diverse creativity then felt like it belonged there. And even from the very first day, we had people stopping us going, my goodness, all the work here feels like it's been here for decades, centuries. It just absolutely sits in, which was very satisfying for us to hear that from people, because that's what we were aiming at. And that then contributes to the whole experience, where you walk in, you feel, wow, this is wondrous. But it's not just the building that's wondrous. It's also the work within the context that actually starts to, and you realize then that contemporary art isn't as superficial as it can sometimes seem in our contemporary art market orientated environment, but actually that it can actually be a meaningful experience for people. And that then the artists were thrilled, because they you see the work in a way and think, oh my goodness. Again, talking about bringing out different aspects of an artist's practice that you don't immediately think of. Doing that, I thought that was one of the great successes, in my opinion, of that show. But it's a very hard building to work with, because it's so intimidating.
But very impressive. And as you said before, I don't know if that's what you wanted to mention in the beginning, because you said we should circle back to the intimidating part of that church. But from the visitor's perspective, we spent hours there. It was fantastic. And also, to me, it was, as you said, you come in, it's huge, it's gigantic, it breathes this history and atmosphere, and at the same time you can sit in there and have a really good cocktail with a quirky name that matches the exhibition and everything. And it was this great mixture also from the organization standpoint, between this old and impressive atmosphere, and at the same time you felt very welcome. And I think that was a big stretch to do, and we really appreciate it, even with the little things like on the first floor on the balconies, you put like just shapes and figures and people up there, which you probably only see if you sit down for like half an hour and just breathe in the atmosphere and see everything. But it was really, really impressive. It was so much fun.
Yeah, it was subtle. Those were Elena's, the artworks on the triforium level, but it was, the cocktails were. We've got some great names for more church-based cocktails. We've
awesome.
had an evening in the pub and just made a list, and I can
imagine that's perfect.
Oh, we got some great names. It was part of the. What's been another great success, which leads on from what you were saying there, is that church is now seen. It's a very well attended church. It's by no means a secret. Okay, it has a very strong congregation, but now what they're seeing is that they have more and more people coming from the art world, from the creative. I think Elena said it brilliantly. She said, we've managed to do what their parents have never managed to do. We got them to go to church.
I think you have. I think you have. That's fantastic. Great. James, if that's fine with you, I have a couple more questions more about the role of art in general. I hope that's fine with you, because I'm not keeping you for too long. But I'm really interested, because you've been at it for quite some time, and if you look back at I guess over 2 decades, I really wonder, how has your definition of a quote unquote wonderful artwork, how's that developed, and how do you feel that has shifted your view on what galleries do today?
In terms of a wonderful artwork, I think, like with anything, the more you do it, and this is certainly true, and everybody knows this in the art world, the more you do it, the more you develop. You develop as a person, you develop your eye, you develop your brain, and you learn you see the same things. When you first get into it, it's all new. You don't know that this has been done 100 times before or something. It's all great and new and novelty and wonderful. So I sound like kind of a jaded, grizzled old art dealer there going,
No.
But you do see a lot of things repeat.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't make them any less wonderful, but I do. I think what has developed complicated. Part of it is just kind of developing your eye and your experience with artworks. I mean, I still get a great deal of satisfaction out of the making of things. This is an old-fashioned view, I know, but I still firmly, I very much enjoy something that's really well made. Kind of the complexity of the difficulty to be able to take, as I was talking about at the beginning, to take a material, base material, and then turn it into this wondrous thing. Just bloody hell, how do you? So that's on its own, but on its own it isn't enough. On its own, and I think that when you first start out, you can quite easily land on that and go, oh, that's an artwork, because that's look how well done it is, And you'd hear that with a lot of people when they're first starting out collecting. That's what it is. It's just the making of it. It's like, wow, that looks just like a photograph. Oh, it's a painting. Yeah, that, thing.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but then really what it doesn't come down to, but as you develop, then you think, okay, so if it's just that, then I get bored very, very, bored isn't the right word. I get disappointed very, very quickly, and it loses my engagement. So because making just for making's sake, doesn't say anything to me. This is very personal. I don't want to be knocking anybody's practice here. I'm just talking about what's interested me. I'm not knocking.
Absolutely.
Making just for its sake, no. Making because there is something about the feel of it, and I'm going to sound like a kind of an old hippie now, but there is something about a kind of the feel of it that things just work. And whether it's vibes, whatever it is, but things just work. And it really does. It becomes special through that. And a lot of the time, part of the artistic process is not necessarily knowing what you're doing, sort of going, I work with some artists and I have a conversation, go, right, I know what I'm going to be doing. And that's what they're going to do. And then it changes. Artists it changes all the time. And the good work is the one that responds to change. The one that people look at and go, I can't even explain why I'm captivated, but it resonates with me in a way far more than admiration for the technical skill of it. It resonates in a way that goes, that hurts. that bothers me. Or, I've had people break down in tears in the gallery looking at artworks. I've had, I've been at fairs. My favorite example of this is, at a fair, and I saw this couple from, the kind of the home counties, the kind of the comfortable bits around the countryside around London. They come along and they were looking at each stand, and then they came onto my stand, and the woman looked around and she spent about 3 minutes, which is longer than she'd been anywhere else. She's 3 minutes. She goes, but this is awful. But this is horrible. What kind of twisted, demented minds would ever make any of these kind of things? They were there for another 20 minutes. They didn't leave. And then when they left, they didn't stop anywhere else because they had no interest in anything else.
Brilliant.
I class that as an enormous achievement because evidently you've had a very meaningful impact with this person. So how to bottle that? I mean, in the question that in terms of kind of knock it down to 1, 2, 3 or 4 criteria, I don't think I'd be able to do that. I think resonance is probably the thing that I really find is the most important aspect. And that comes down into sort of emotional resonance, which is an important thing. You have an admiration for what has been achieved in the object. There's an emotional resonance. There's conceptual resonance when you can see an artist is playing with ideas in ways and you go, that's a little bit like, again, it can be stylistic, that's like somebody being able to dance well. They can just throw off, they can throw off an impressionist reference like that, and then they can, there's another Baroque reference like that, and they fling them together, and you go, yeah, that's well done. Oh, that's very satisfying. the thing that I really look for is this sense of resonance where I have no idea why, but it actually this makes me quake slightly, and that's I don't feel there's a formula for that, and I think a lot of artists might agree with me. I don't think there's a formula for that. There was a second part to your question. What was that?
That's well. Before we move on to the second part, I wonder, because what you describe is, I can absolutely relate, and I think a lot of people listening can relate too. It's like you have this in other fields as well. I think you can line up all the right words and use the right grammar, and still you don't tell a captivating story. Or if you do music, you can write the perfect harmonies and it doesn't fit. And sometimes you just have to jam and then you feel there is something. So would you use a term like Walter Benjamin did with aura? Is this something that maybe captures what you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, aura is, I don't know whether aura captures it, because it's all orbiting around the same thing.
Yeah.
Because the idea of an aura is that you kind of, that's sort of a property of, that goes back to the idea of relics.
Mm-hmm.
That it is a property of the physical object.
Yeah.
Somewhat. But somewhat. But I still think there's something, there's more to it in terms of, there are just some things that, this is why we have aesthetic objects and always have done, is because they articulate things, no matter how good our language skills are, that they can't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that can be as simple as a really, really raw abstract painting, but if just the right balance of colors there. And again, as I say, I deal with the public, and you can have this with people who go, oh, just like my kid could do that. But then you get people, my kid could do that comment kind of people, but they'll still look at that and go, no, that's stunning. That's stunning. And they'll come. And the funny thing, because I'm open to the public, I will have people come in 5 years later to tell me about that experience.
Wow, that's intense. That's amazing.
People come back to me to tell me about things. And that is an aspect, I suppose, because a lot of galleries are closed to the public. They're open to the public, but they're hidden away.
They're closed. Yeah.
They don't want to be dealing with the public. It's like, oh yeah, I got one of those, but I bought it in the Seychelles. No, so it's they don't want to have to deal with all of that, and a lot of it is extremely tiresome. It really, really is. But when you have those moments where you, it's the same thing as what I'm saying. When you make this real connection with people, and you see it happen, and you see somebody just go, I've just had, when I have somebody in here and I see them have a meaningful experience, go, I'm sounding so pompous, but it really is true. You see them have a meaningful experience, just go, oh, that's me doing my job.
Makes it all worth it.
Why the Slipping the Veil show was so satisfying, because it was, I mean, we just had people walking through like this, and people just stopping us.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So
beautiful. It's really beautiful. Second half of my question was, and to circle back to what we just said and what you said right at the beginning, when you were walking through London and you saw all these modern buildings and a lot of aesthetics informed by functionality, by capitalist idea of how things have to work and perform and be worth it, quote unquote. And then going back to what how you think about art, what you think about the role of art, as far as I can understand from what we just talked about. Where do you see the role of galleries today, and maybe even in the future?
Okay, I mean, there's a big, you probably know this will change context depending on when anybody is listening to this. At the moment, there's a big existential, everybody's like, oh, what are galleries for? Big galleries are closing, fairs are closing, lots of smaller galleries closing. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's time for a restructure, different meaning, this, that, and the other. When I'm a little cynical, I've been doing it a long time, and I think a lot of people, current generation, need to feel like they're behind a cause the whole time, like everything has to be this massive kind of, social revolution. I think it's just at the moment is that, between the horrific situation with the number of wars that we have and and the disintegration of the post-war order is causing a degree of uncertainty, which means people don't want to spend money, and that's making it very, very hard. We have a system that's organized around, and I actually don't have an issue with artists making money off selling artworks. I actually don't really think it's such a bad system, because the system of, oh, well, you're working for a patron under another, like some big, people want to be working for what, big commissions for what, or public money, but everything comes with strings attached and values attached. Now, if you happen to beautifully align with them, then great. But I think I'd like to believe most artists are a bit more independent than that, and would prefer their practice to be more independent than that. And as imperfect as it is, the current system that we have, whereby people pay you money for an object because they want that object, is probably better than most of the other options available, albeit imperfect. What are the role of galleries? I mean, the moment of reflection and kind of self-doubt at the moment, believe me, if somebody poured a bucket load of money on it, that would totally change in an instant. It's people are talking about the grind and people getting tired of the grind, and I can totally understand that, because it can be very hard to keep going. Is what I was talking about, and doing lots of shows, and you have to keep your enthusiasm. Now, if your enthusiasm is money purely, I'm not going to pretend I don't get enthusiastic about money. That would be a lie. Approach me with lots of money, you'll see my enthusiasm rise through the roof. Please try it. But I still believe you also need to have other, if your only motivation is money, then you're going to find these conditions extremely difficult. So then that leads us to, well, what's the role of a gallery? Is a gallery just there to sell for you? I am here to sell for artists, yes. But also, like I was talking about, I introduce artists to each other that have they've never showed before otherwise. Contextualization, I think, is actually a very important activity in the art world, the aesthetic realm. The things don't exist on their own. It's about putting things in context, about making connections. One of the things I quite like, that I've heard it for many, many years about the openings at my gallery, is that people come and they stay. You'll probably find, you'll see this a lot of the time with openings at galleries. People turn up, they're there 5 minutes. It's quick. As soon as they can finish the beer or whatever they're drinking, they're off. And I take it as a great compliment that people come and they stay for my openings. They meet people. People have made connections with each other, creative connections through my gallery, friendships through my gallery. And also, I've worked with lots of artists who've given them the framework to develop. They may not feel this way about it, but I have to give myself a sense of purpose every now and again. That sort of helping artists at a younger stage then develop and putting them in context. I think that's a role that a gallery has. It's quite important. As I was saying, if a gallery is not going to be doing it, then the artist certainly has to be doing it for themselves. So that's one of the roles that I think is going to be quite hard to. You've got unusual examples like Elena that I work with. Elena is an artist who also wants to be a curator, wants to be curator, the right way to term that, who wants to be curating as well as painting and as being an artist. But most artists aren't necessarily like that. So, you need some kind of infrastructure, some kind of network for the presentation, receipt, display, interpretation. Even if you remove the commercial aspect, you still need that. And the thing is that anybody who believes that our museums are going to provide that, good luck. They're after ticket sales a lot of the time. There are museum directors who probably don't want to sit next to me for a meal, because I give them a hard time on it. I'm like, I'm not going to mention any artist names, but what, again, this artist? We've just had a show in that museum and that museum and that museum and that museum and that. Do we need another show from this artist? We don't. We all know
it sells the tickets. Yeah.
Sells the tickets. My point is, do your everyday ticket selling artists. By all means, do them. But please plow some of it back into supporting the rest of us that isn't in your big blue chip galleries, that isn't a Gagosian artist, that isn't a Pace artist. Please give it to, provide something.
Mm-hmm.
And to be fair, I work with museums and some of them do, but there's not enough of it. So, and they can't take the same risks, creative risks that a gallery of my size can take.
Yeah.
Who can look at it and go, do you know what? I'm going to do a show just because you're doing interesting work and this artist is, and I've got an idea that will tie you together. Let's do it. And they can't do that. They can't do it. And that's what we were really missing, because we have less and less project spaces. That was the real beauty of project spaces, is that that allowed that massively.
Yes.
But small galleries like me also provide that on a more commercial level, but we also provide that. So, and I think that's necessary for development, not just of an artist, but of the artist community, the energy behind everything. Yes. I think that's necessary. So, and I see that as the role now. I think you take that away. Where does it happen? Mm-hmm. The museums aren't going to do it for you.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but they're not going to do it for you. And your online experience is a nail clipping versus the real experience of being in front of the artworks. So where's it going to happen? Coherently as a group, as a kind of with momentum, not 100%. Just like kind of, because you see this, you can go to places that have a noticeable absence of an art scene, and then you'll have the odd show here and there. And if you want to know what galleries are for, then you go to places that don't have them. And then you see how patchy it is and how the artists there are crying out, would anybody take this church and do a bloody show in it and just do something and make something? And that's another thing I heard from doing Slipping the Veil.
Yeah.
People wanting to go, why can't we use more churches around me and do more shows and do more things? And I agree entirely. But you need people like me to do that.
Yeah.
Fortunately. So
fortunately, that's very well put, James. Thank you so much. We're down to the very last question, which you can answer as short or as extensive as you like. I'm interested if you could embed one thought or one question in every visitor's mind as they leave your gallery. What would it be? Oh gosh, I have to give you a serious answer for that, because I can think of so many silly replies. You don't have to. It's a really podcast question, but
no. All right. One question. I really don't know, actually. It's very hard, that, because I really do get such a diverse across the board range of people. I don't know. I don't know. Sorry.
Don't worry. That's fine.
Yeah. I can't come up with a decent reply to that.
That's good. If we talk again, you can.
Yeah, the only good.
You can give me the answer.
The first thing that came to mind was, how does he make a living?
I love that. That wraps up a lot of this conversation, and you find the answers in between the lines of what we just talked about. Beautiful. James, thank you so much for taking the time, having a chat with me today. For all the people listening, go see the current exhibition is called Summer. It runs until September 7th in your gallery in London. Go see that, people. And there's going to be, as we learned today, plenty more exhibition. Every couple of weeks, a new show.
Not quite, but
feels like. Thank you so much for being here, James.
Thanks ever so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Discover more inspiring talks, audio documentaries, or art performances. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform and visit our website for more information. That's maison-douce.com. maison-douce.com.